Andy de Fonseca is an avid volunteer at the Adler Planetarium, and after many years, come on up, Andy, of teaching and promoting space science to Adler visitors, founded the Chicago branch of the Planetary Society, a space exploration advocacy group started in 1980 by Carl Sagan. She is published author and currently a student in aerospace engineering. Robert Roy, Bob Poole, come on up, Bob, is the writer of Armageddon. Bob also wrote the highly successful movie Breakout, starring Dustin Hoffman. Outbreak, I knew that. Outbreak was about the risks to humanity about a virus first found in monkeys. Bob's first film, The Big Town, starred Matt Dillon, Tommy Lee Jones, and Diane Lane, was set in a gambling structure in Chicago in the 1950s. So it's kind of a homecoming to Bob, who of course now lives in, of course, Beverly Hills. Where else? Armageddon is Bob's fourth film. Bob and I are currently collaborating on turning my novel about election hacking into a movie. That's how we met. Dr. Mark Hammergren is an astronomer and science communicator at the Adler Planetarium. He is the director of Adler's Astro Science Workshop, a challenging astronomy program for high school students founded in 1964. He co-created Adler's Far Horizons Citizen Space Exploration Program, which has launched more than 124 high-altitude balloon missions and is currently gearing up to develop a small scientific satellite. His research interests include asteroids, meteorites, impacts, and mass extinctions, and the history and sociology of the flying saucer phenomenon. His wide-ranging interests and experience have led to his being a consultant on astronomy and UFO cults for the TV series CSI, forensic astronomy, and image analysis for the U.S. Army as part of a murder trial, and for the ocean recovery of the first Russian commercial space capsule, during which he became the first Westerner to embark on a Russian Navy ship at sea. He's a frequent media commentator on space subjects, and he sits on the board of 137 Films, which is located here in Chicago, and Fresh Films. And so, Andy, if you'd like to get us started.
All right, will do. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I hope you're all excited to chat about Armageddon, that wonderful factually wonderful movie. It'll be exciting. Icebreaker question. Favorite actor in the movie? Bob.
Bruce Willis.
All right. Mark.
Steve Buscemi, easy.
Yeah, yeah.
Will Patton's also a favorite of mine.
I read something that Steve Buscemi didn't want to be like a scummy character, but they made him a scummy character anyway. So, all right, we're going to kick this off with the trailer to this fantastic movie. So, let's see that.
Down 911!
What hit us?
Small asteroid fragments. This morning. How big were those?
Those were nothing. The size of basketballs and Volkswagens.
This new one you're tracking, how big?
It's the size of Texas, Mr. President. It's what we call a global killer. The end of mankind.
Half the world will be incinerated by the heat blast, and the rest will freeze to death in nuclear winter. Basically the worst parts of the Bible.
Hitting the rock from the outside will do the job.
So, we nuke this thing from the inside? How?
We drill. We're bringing the world's best deep core driller.
The United States government has just asked us to save the world.
We're talking about space, right? Outer space? This is like deep blue hero stuff.
I'm there.
I'm with you.
Beam me up, Scotty.
I want all of you listening to know that everything that can be done to wage this terrible battle is being called into service. May we all see these events through with the courage worthy of this challenge.
All right, flight directors, I want the go, no, go for launch. Booster, go flight. GNC, go flight.
Hey, Harry, you know we're sitting on 4 million pounds of fuel, 1 nuclear weapon, and a thing that has 200,000 moving parts built by the lowest bidder. Makes you feel good, doesn't it?
We're going. Okay, gentlemen. You're warriors up there. You're already heroes. Just sit back and enjoy the ride.
The dreams of an entire planet are focused on the 14 brave souls traveling into the heavens.
Astronauts, welcome to space.
It's about time. I haven't thrown up in about an hour.
I'd start praying about it right now.
Listen, this is a kick-ass ride.
Touchstone Pictures presents Bruce Willis, Billy Bob Thornton, Liv Tyler, Ben Affleck, Will Patton, and Steve Buscemi.
Just hold on! Fall back for the other team! No hit! Matt, get in here! That is my father up there!
You don't have to worry about me and my team. We'll get the job done.
Who here hasn't seen the movie Armageddon?
Bruckheimer production, directed by Michael Bay.
You are missing out on a fantastic movie full of male heroes and a female who cries and has sex. So, it is a wonderful movie, guys. One female. Okay, so, Bob, you wrote the original story to Armageddon.
I did.
Could you please give us a brief synopsis on how this movie would have gone if it followed your original ideas?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that question. I started this project in 1995. Well, actually, I started researching it in 1992 because I'd read in magazines that an asteroid had come down and killed the dinosaurs. And there were lots of magazine articles around that time. And I said, if that's really true, we got to do a movie somehow. So I started working on it, and I quickly hit an impasse. I got a lot of good ideas for it, but I quickly hit an impasse because there was no way to deflect an asteroid. None. NASA had done a big study in early 1992, and they had a big conference at Los Alamos, and all the scientists who got together concluded that there was really no way to deflect an asteroid. So I thought, I don't have a third act. You know, there's no way to stop this thing. So I went off and worked on the movie Outbreak for about 1.5 years. And then after Outbreak was released, I came back and started working on the asteroid impact movie again. At that time, I called it Premonition. And my story was very, very different. It involved something that was much more believable because I had checked with the scientists. I had gone to talk to a man named Brian Marsden at Harvard, and he gave me 6 hours of his time. And I will never forget, it was a Friday afternoon. He gave me 6 hours of his time, and it was the most intense conversation I've ever had in my life. And my brain was sprained for about 2 days after that. I could not think. But he told me everything he knew about tracking and calculating the trajectories of asteroids and the real problems. And he basically persuaded me that the real problem is a relatively small asteroid that comes upon us really quickly. So we don't have much time to prepare, and it's going to hit us in a day or two, a couple of days. And so I cooked up a scenario where the asteroid is about 39 hours away from hitting the Earth when it's first really detected. And it's actually first detected by psychics who say that there's going to be a terrible disaster, but they don't really know what it is. So that's hence the title, Premonition. But there's one guy who works in the National Security Council. His name is George. And he, for whatever reason, he takes these premonitions seriously and decides he's going to check further.
For plot. There's a reason for it's for plot.
This is for plot. So he goes to his buddy in the CIA who specializes in psychics and says, can we believe this stuff? And the guy says, no, not really. I mean, they're all over the place. They say all sorts of things. But, you know, there's a lot of consistency with these different reports. So I'm starting to think that maybe you should do something. So George continues his investigation, and eventually he realizes it might be an asteroid impact. And he gets an astronomer, a young, attractive woman.
Yeah,
Of
as
course,
you do.
as we do in the movies. And he gets her to use her telescope to look for the asteroid in the place where he thinks it will be found, and there it is. And then that's how he and his group are the first to detect this thing. But it's real close to the Earth. They don't have a lot of time, and one thing leads to another, and eventually they deflect it in the third act. They deflect it with gravity beams. And I've talked with Mark about gravity beams. Now, gravity beams probably don't actually exist. But it was a really cool idea that they had talked about, along with X-ray lasers and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff, back at the time of the Strategic Defense Initiative. How many people have ever heard of the Strategic Defense Initiative?
Yeah.
Oh, that's half the audience. Okay.
That's great.
It was talked about constantly in around 1984 and 85 during the Reagan administration. And there were lots and lots of ideas that were being bounced around that might be able to deflect missiles. And some of these technologies were thought to be able to deflect asteroids as well. So I grabbed one of those because I didn't really have a third act. I had no way to stop the asteroid. So I grabbed one of those ideas and said, what if it actually works? Let's see what that would mean. Let's play that out. And created a third act around that idea. The coolest thing to me about a gravity beam was that it actually slowed down time. And the thing about an asteroid impact is that if you could just slow it down by 7 or 8 minutes, it would arrive late for its rendezvous with the Earth. And so I explained this to the Disney executives, and they said, what? And they said, well, first of all, they said, you've given us a first draft in which there's only one explosion, okay? And I said, yeah, but it's the largest explosion ever witnessed by human beings. Isn't that good enough? And they said, no. This was the weekend after the movie Twister had appeared in theaters in 1996. And the Disney studio executive, I remember very clearly telling me, we've got to have more explosions. And then I explained to him, well, that's going to be really hard to do in this scenario because, asteroid impacts are very, very rare. It's like 1 every 30 million years. And the chances that you would have 2 on consecutive days are, probably 0. So it's just really not possible. And they said, more explosions. And I said, well, the Earth is a moving target. And the Disney execs then said, what? What? The Earth is moving? I said, yes. The Earth goes around the sun. And he said, oh, I knew that. And I said, yeah, and there's a velocity associated with that progression, and it's going to move 1.4 million miles from one day to the next. So if you have an asteroid impact on one day, and then you have another one the next day, the Earth has moved 1.4 million miles between the two impacts. And so the two asteroids would have nothing to do with each other. They would be completely separate, independent events. And the odds of that are so remote, it's probably never happened in the history of the universe. I didn't know if that was true. That might have been a little bit of hype, but it probably never will happen. And so they said, well, we don't care, and the audience doesn't care. We got to have more explosions.
So in my screenwriting class days, the rule was do not dumb down to your audience. How much did you have to dumb down to your audience?
Totally. They just wanted a lot more action. So I did a second draft in which there were, in fact, more explosions. And we tried to explain it through some bogus meteor shower thing. And but then eventually what happened is they got Jerry Bruckheimer involved, and he got Michael Bay involved. See, I had developed the whole project with a producer named Gail Ann Hurd. And people have often heard of Gail Ann Hurd. She co-wrote the original screenplay for Terminator with her husband, James Cameron. And that was a really good movie. And then she went on to produce a number of his subsequent films, including The Abyss. Yeah, interesting movie. And she was a real nice producer. I had a good relationship with her. I kind of trusted her to protect my script. But while we were working on the movie that became Armageddon, she went off to Washington State to make a movie called Dante's Peak with Pierce Brosnan. Did anybody see Dante's Peak? Okay. Anybody see the companion movie called Volcano with Tommy Lee Jones? All right. So Gale Ann Hurd had 2 different disaster projects in development. One was Dante's Peak, and they were ready to go. So she went away for 6 months to go shoot that. In the meantime, Jerry Bruckheimer took over the movie that became Armageddon. And he and I did not exactly get along. And he thought the movie was too cerebral and had to have a lot more explosions. A lot more explosions, okay? So he brought on Michael Bay, and Michael Bay was of the same mind, a lot more explosions.
Yes, he is. Yep.
So they basically threw out my script and came up with a whole new scenario in which they would do some oil well drilling on an asteroid. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. But by this time, they didn't really care what I thought anymore. I had just done this hit movie, Outbreak, but they really didn't care what I thought. And they said, we're going to drill on this asteroid. And it's going to be great, and everybody's going to love it, and it's going to be a big hit. And you know what? They weren't wrong. I mean, I've talked to at least 20 people who tell me, well, let me just ask this audience, how many of you people think that Armageddon is the best movie you've ever seen? Okay, one. There's one. Okay. I've talked to, now you're 21, I've talked to 21 people who've told me it's the best movie they've ever seen. And, you know, it's not scientifically accurate on any level, and that's my biggest problem with it. But I do think it's fun. I think it's a fun movie.
It's fun.
At least
it's
the first
a
half.
popcorn-eating movie.
It's a what?
It's a popcorn-eating movie.
Yeah, it's a popcorn-y movie. You're not supposed to think much, and there are lots of explosions. And just in case you think you're going to get shortchanged by too few explosions, the first 5 minutes, I mean, how many people remember the first 5 minutes of Armageddon? Okay.
Mark, you've been a science and technical advisor for big and small screens. So what is the role of a science advisor on a TV and movie set?
Yeah. So science advisors are called in when the creative producers, the people who are writing scripts, who are directing the film, anybody involved with the creative process, when they want to get advice. And the most important thing to remember is that when you're called in as a consultant like that, when you're asked for advice, you are not in the driver's seat. They have specific questions, or they want to talk over concepts with you. And it's not the same kind of thing with everyone. Different people, different groups, they want different things. So they might say, hey, I've got an idea about a time travel movie. And what kind of physics could allow that? And so you can have a hours-long conversation, like you did with Brian Marsden, about all of the basic concepts by that. And that I think is really good when you get called in early in the creative process, so you can really, hopefully, help set the direction of the film. Other times, though, they've got specific questions. I was contacted by the writers for CSI, the original series, and they already had a concept for an episode script, and it was going to feature a UFO cult. I don't know if you might have seen that episode, but the episode was scheduled to be aired in October, and they wanted to have a meteor shower, and they had a specific question: are there any meteor showers around this time of year that these people could see? And I replied that, yeah, sure, there's the Orionid meteor shower, which originates from Halley's Comet. And what's also interesting is I have a longstanding history in longstanding interest in the history of the flying saucer phenomenon. So that really tied into their UFO cult thing. And that allowed me to kind of riff on that and say, well, Orion, the constellation, has been associated by some fringe people with the Egyptian pyramids, and so there's so there's a whole bunch of things, and I was able to suggest all kinds of things that could be brought in to help flesh out this UFO cult. And they ended up using a bunch of that in the show too. Pictures hanging on the wall of the cult hangout, that kind of thing.
But that's always refreshing whenever your advice is actually taken.
Yeah. And it was really cool. That was one of my best experiences, and got a great reply. Said, "You saved the day." And all right. when you've got the hit TV show, I mean, the most popular TV show on at the time, you know, and you can make that kind of impact, it makes you feel good.
Yeah, of course.
What is that episode called?
I don't remember.
We'll Google it. It's okay. If we could prep for the next movie clip, it's just a question of when. For that one, that would be great. Thank you. Any other anecdotes, quick ones for science advising?
Oh, for science advising.
Either.
When I was researching the movie that became Armageddon, I actually met with the president's science advisor in Washington, D.C., on the same trip where I went to meet Brian Marsden at Harvard. He didn't know anything, though. I was really quite shocked that I'd read like 3 books on asteroid impacts, and I already knew more than he did about that topic.
Alrighty. We can sit and watch this.
At a time when the dinosaurs roamed a lush and fertile planet. A piece of rock just 6 miles wide changed all that. It hit with a force of 10,000 nuclear weapons. 1 trillion tons of dirt and rock hurtled into the atmosphere, creating a suffocating blanket of dust the sun was powerless to penetrate for 1,000 years. It happened before. It will happen again. It's just a question of when.
Test. All right. It's just a question on when. Mark, when?
When? There are a couple different ways of answering that question. Now, what Charlton Heston said there was true. It did happen before.
I did not know that. It was Charlton Heston.
Oh, yeah. He's got a very recognizable voice. So this absolutely has happened before. And the impact that led to the mass extinction of the dinosaurs, which is very nearly a closed case, honestly, happened about 66 million years ago. But it was not the largest impact that has ever happened to the Earth, and it's not even the largest impact that has been located in the form of a crater on the planet Earth. Very largest one dates back a few billion years. It's in South Africa, and it's a couple times the size of the crater that was found half on and half off the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, the Chicxulub crater, which is the one that was tied to the mass extinction of the dinosaurs. So impacts of that size, roughly 6 miles across, he got that right, about 10 kilometers in size, roughly the size of Mount Everest. Those happen on average, statistically, about every 100 million years. Now, that's not like clockwork. It doesn't mean, okay, 66 million years ago, now we've got another 34 million years to go. If we knew nothing about the asteroid population, then an impact could happen in 200 million years. It could happen in 1 week. It could be coming in right now if we knew nothing about the asteroid population. But I've been studying near-Earth asteroids for, 26 years, something like that. And systematic surveys for hazardous asteroids have been underway for decades, really ramped up over the past decade or so with electronic detectors, more money being thrown at it. And of the asteroids of that size in the near-Earth asteroid population, 6 miles, 10 kilometers or bigger, we have cataloged every single one in the near-Earth asteroid population. We have found every single one of that size or larger. Every single one in the near-Earth asteroid population. Now, there might be some much further out in the solar system with comet-like orbits who come through so infrequently that they just haven't been spotted yet. But the less frequently they come through, the lower their threat. So we might have something coming through, maybe even a comet that would come in unpredicted. But of the ones that are in near-Earth space, we found all of them. And they've been observed very well. And they've been followed up for decades so that we can predict where they're going to be for something like almost 1,000 years into the future. We can say whether they're going to hit the Earth or not. And not a single one of them is going to hit the Earth within that time scale. Now, longer-term computer simulations show that their orbits can be modified over time, just gentle tugs from Jupiter, that kind of thing, and that if they're not in an Earth-crossing orbit now, in a few million years they might be. And in about 6 million years' time, one of the very largest near-Earth asteroids, Eros, which is about 40 kilometers long, so about 25, 30 miles long, much bigger than the one that hit 66 million years ago. That is going to be put on an Earth-crossing orbit by these gravitational perturbations. So in a long-term sense, Charlton Heston was right. It's going to happen again. But it's not going to happen anytime soon, not on that scale.
Fantastic, thank you.
So we've got plenty of time to get ready.
We do have plenty of time to maybe come up with a solution that we haven't come up with yet. I think we're going to hold it off till the last minute, knowing us. Armageddon was an extremely successful movie, despite it all. 554 million box office. Even with its science, more like the physics in a Fast and Furious movie. So compare this to the success of The Martian and Interstellar, whose movies were very science-focused, very, they wanted to be as accurate as possible. It leaves me wondering.
Those movies were actually both pretty successful also.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah, The Martian, which I really loved. How many people saw The Martian?
It's great.
Okay, I love that one. It was very accurate. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I had in mind for my script, but it didn't turn out.
It's okay, it's okay. Bob, so is there necessarily a conflict between technical accuracy and the creative process?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, I did have to confront that fundamental demand that there had to be more explosions, that no matter... It created a problem for me that I couldn't in the end solve in any plausible way. That, you know, there had to be multiple explosions when in fact with an asteroid impact scenario you're talking about one big bang. And I just couldn't find a way to do it plausibly, but I did add some explosions in the second draft, and then of course once Jerry Bruckheimer and Michael Bay got involved, I don't know if anybody's ever counted the explosions in Armageddon. I wonder. Certainly, it's enough. I think we can say it's enough.
They look like beautiful fireworks. So
yeah. So no, I don't think there's an inherent conflict. I think there's a way to do every story in a way that's plausible but also exciting. When we worked on Outbreak, we had similar kinds of problems. You know, the third act wasn't exciting enough. We needed a bigger third act, and we were able to come up with a really, really good idea to create. How many people have seen Outbreak? Okay, not as many, but a lot. In the first drafts of Outbreak, we didn't have the idea that the monkey would escape from the pet shop. Okay, so in the first draft of Outbreak, when they got to the pet shop, they had the monkey. And once they had the monkey, they had the antibodies. So the problem was essentially solved on an intellectual level, at least. And that resulted in a very boring third act that wasn't exciting. It wasn't, you know, extremely, it didn't represent an escalation from the second act. So the problem we had with Outbreak was that the middle of the movie, when the virus is erupting in the small town and everybody's getting sick, was always tremendously exciting. It moved really fast and people found it riveting. But then once the army arrives and contains the virus in the town, it settled into a kind of static situation where there was nothing further that we could do to escalate the drama. So we had kind of a weak third act. Now, this wouldn't matter to anybody who cares about science, first and foremost, but to the movie business, that was a huge problem. We had to have a bigger third act, or we were never going to get that movie made. And so I was working with the development executive whose name was Nana. She worked for the producer named Arnold Kopelson. And one day I threw out an idea. I said, well, maybe they get so desperate that they decide they have to firebomb the town to stop the spread of the virus. And she said, oh, no, Bob, that's not a stupid idea. I said, yes, it is, Nana. It's a completely stupid idea. And let me tell you why. Because they could never make that decision. They could never make a decision to kill 2,500 people. Because they could never know for sure what the consequences of not doing that would be. So they would procrastinate and wait and see, and then the virus would escape from the town, and it would infect the entire world, and that's what would happen. And there was a movie made about 10 years after Outbreak called Contagion. It was actually directed by Steven Soderbergh, and Kate Winslet was in it. How many people have seen Contagion? Okay, so about the same number who've seen Outbreak. Contagion was a really interesting movie, I thought, and they actually followed through on that idea that I'd had, which was that this virus gets out of the town and it hits the entire world. And now you have to deal with a global pandemic. So it changed the storyline in such fundamental ways, though, that you couldn't tell the story with just a few characters in one place. You had to have 5 different characters spread out all over the world. I believe the Matt Damon character in Contagion actually is living right outside of Chicago, if I'm not mistaken. And he holds up and tries to protect his family from the virus. Anyway, that was the result of the virus escaping from the town. So that was the consequence of them making the decision that they would really make in the real world, which was they would never firebomb the town. Anyway, Nana Greenwald convinced me that it wasn't the stupidest idea I'd ever had. So we called up my writing partner, Laurie Dworet, who is an emergency room doctor. And we called him up. He was on vacation in France. And we said, Laurie, I've got this idea. It's not a terrible idea. But what if the Army decides they have to firebomb the town? And he said, well, Bob, it's just not plausible. It's just not plausible. And then we debated it for a while. And then all of a sudden, within a week, we had pitched it to the studio executive. And he said, we love it. We love it. Firebomb the town? Yeah, go for it. So again, more explosions. Of course. And so we then constructed a third act. It took us the better part of 2 or 3 months to completely redo the third act so that we had a big scene at the end of the movie where the Air Force was actually planning to firebomb the town, and Dustin Hoffman has to stop them. And that allowed us to get the movie made. I don't think the movie would have been made if we hadn't come up with that. And yet, in the movie, it's reasonably plausible. I mean, I've never talked to anyone who's told me, oh, I didn't believe the firebombing thing.
But they watched Armageddon. It's okay.
So, no, I think, to answer your question, I think you can always make it plausible, but it takes a lot of thinking to come up with plot twists that are actually plausible.
Yeah. Science isn't as exciting as explosions with lots of fireworks, so we've got to tweak it a little. All right, we're going to watch the next clip now. It's my favorite clip of the whole movie, so I hope you enjoy it.
My screen's full. They're all over the place. You should reach an atmosphere from Finland down the North American seaboard.
There's a lot of explosions.
Over to Hamill.
That's it. I love it.
We're moving the Hubble.
We're moving the Hubble. Mark, we're moving the Hubble. Expand.
So what they really mean is they're not really moving the Hubble, they're turning the Hubble. They're going to point it at this incoming asteroid, which is, 600 miles across. Yeah. And you wouldn't need the Hubble to observe that kind of thing. You might want high-resolution images, but for goodness sake, what is it, 18 days away, and it's 600 miles across. Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll give them that. If something like that was coming, all of the world's resources in terms of astronomy would be turned to that effort. Okay, so yeah, I'll give it that, but oh, come on. Oh, we're turning the Hubble.
We're moving the Hubble just flippantly. Was there, Mark, to go on to that, was there anything in this movie that was considered correct at the time, but is now incorrect, and vice versa?
Oh boy, so it came out in '98, and that was my final year of graduate school. I was just finishing up my thesis on the composition of near-Earth asteroids. So trying to figure out what's the whole population like? What are the different kinds of materials they're made of? And how does that relate to meteorites that land naturally on Earth? Because those populations are connected. Wow. And I saw the movie, and I don't know. It's really tough to think of what is scientifically correct, even in thought back at that time about it. I'll tell you what. Some of the things that are wrong: the appearance of the asteroid, the size of the asteroid, how late it was discovered. Gosh, the meteors coming through, and roaring, size of basketballs and cars. Later on, we'll be able to see some real videos of what these things look like.
Do you want to see them now?
Yeah, we can get to it in a bit here.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, so. I had completely forgotten that teaser or trailer narrated by Charlton Heston. That was true. That was real. But I
so they got
completely
one bit
forgotten
right.
it was connected, yeah.
All right, good. You can't mess up history that's been, scientifically proven too much. In general, what has been learned in the past 20 years that helps toward survival of humans? That when the asteroid does come, will help us survive.
Yeah. So asteroids have come. We're hit by small things all the time. On a dark sky, if you go out at night, away from cities, and you look up on any random night, you might see 1 or 2 meteors or shooting stars an hour. And on most nights, those things are small pieces of asteroids. And by small, something as bright as the brightest stars in the sky is going to be maybe about a couple millimeters across, size of a BB, maybe up to the size of a penny, shooting into the atmosphere at speeds of around 40,000 miles an hour, burning up at about maybe 60 miles up, about 100 kilometers up. So yeah, they hit it all the time. Bigger ones about a meter, so 3 to 6 feet across, hit the Earth randomly about 20 to 30 times a year, and that's big enough to drop meteorites on the surface of the Earth. But bigger ones than that are much, much rarer. There are a lot fewer big ones than there are small ones.
Yeah. All right, guys, we're going to see the last clip from Armageddon. It's the climax of the film, so let's watch that now.
We've reached 1 minute. Come on, press that button. We're going back and do it ourselves. Just don't wait 1 minute. Come on, hurry, press the button.
Colonel, I'm asking you just 1 more minute.
Press the button, Stamper.
So for those who haven't seen the movie, there you go. Sorry. I should have mentioned a spoiler alert.
Well, the fact that the Earth is not destroyed, I don't think is a huge surprise.
This is a documentary. I would suggest going home, getting popcorn, maybe taking a shot every time you see an explosion or bad signs, but don't do
that's
that.
a bad idea.
You'll go to the hospital. All right. So, Mark, what is there a plan in place for thousands of years from now? Maybe like what may happen? What will we do if this happens? What if something comes out of nowhere? What's the plan?
Yeah, so really good question. And there's been a lot of thought put onto that, not only defense from large asteroids like the global killers, which, by the way, nobody calls them that, but smaller ones, because you can go down to sizes of about 140 meters, a few hundred feet across, and you are going to have still substantial local damage, not global damage. So you got to deal with that. You find one coming like that, what are you going to do? Simplest thing to do is once you find it on an impact course, you will also know where it is going to hit to within about 1 kilometer on the Earth. And this has actually been done before. Yeah, we'll talk about that, I guess, in a little bit. But you can predict exactly where it's going to come in. And if it's not, you know, in the middle of London or Moscow or something like that, you can evacuate that area, because small ones will only affect areas up to, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 miles across. You can potentially evacuate that. That's the easiest thing, and you can do that in days, potentially.
The best example of that is the Tunguska event, right, which happened in Siberia.
That's right, yeah. So an asteroid neighborhood of 100 feet across, roughly, came down in 1908 over northern Siberia. Very sparsely inhabited area, although there were people there, nomadic reindeer herders. And it was seen for hundreds of miles around as this brilliant fireball in the sky, which exploded in the air above the Siberian forest. And the explosion was so powerful that it blasted down the forest there, knocked the trees down for an area larger than Chicago and the suburbs, really. Now, that was not scientifically investigated for a long time because it was 1908 in Russia. Historians, you might know that something was going on around those times. It was 20 years before a science expedition was mounted there, and they still found the forest flattened. New growth coming up, but still, what caused this? It was a big puzzle because there was no crater. But in the 1990s, computer simulations of asteroid impacts had gotten along far enough where we realized that small asteroids can break up almost completely, and the air blast directed downwards can cause that kind of damage.
So even a small asteroid could take out a city.
Absolutely. If the Earth had turned another 6 hours, that impact would have been over London. So millions of people would have been killed. What defense do we have against that? Evacuation number one. If we have more time, warning time is essential. Well, we don't have any spacecraft or any resources deployed yet or even designed and built yet. But ideas...
No space lasers?
Yeah, well...
What about the Space Force?
Space Force.
Space Force.
Space Force.
I think that's where Bruce Willis comes in, right? Yeah. But yeah, you can try to deflect them by setting off a nuke next to them and just have the radiation puff off some dust and knock them off course gently. What you don't want to do, almost never, is what we see in Armageddon. You don't want to try to blow it up completely. First of all, asteroids are not large, solid chunks of rock. They're not going to split cleanly in two and fly past the Earth. They're going to blow up into millions of pieces. And you gotta remember how fragmentation works. You got an asteroid that's, say, 10 kilometers across, all right? You break that up into 1 kilometer pieces, which are still really big. You got 1,000 of them that size that you have to track and to try to deal with then in the future. Instead of getting hit by a single bullet, you're getting hit by a shotgun blast. And it's the energy that really causes the damage, not whether it's one piece or 1,000 pieces.
So, like the scene they just showed in the movie, what would really happen if you tried to split an asteroid with a big nuclear weapon?
Holy cow, if it was a 600-mile-wide asteroid, first of all, you'd need a really big bomb. And what would happen? Well, you would fragment it into a tremendous number of pieces. There's no bomb even imagined that would create a blast big enough to vaporize that, yeah.
So it would still hit at approximately the same trajectory that it had originally.
Absolutely, yeah. It wouldn't. There's nothing imaginable that it could impart enough velocity to cause it to miss the Earth.
All right. One more thing about asteroids. We had a recent asteroid over Russia a couple years ago, 3 years ago?
Back in 2013, yeah.
Oh, God, the years are going by so fast. All right, so back in 2013, were we aware of that one? Did that one come out of nowhere? What's the story on that one?
That one came out of nowhere. So February 15th, I believe it was, 2013. It was the early morning hours. The sun had just risen over the city of Chelyabinsk, Russia. It's I was kind of ticked off when I watched CNN. They were saying sparsely inhabited Western Siberia. No, Chelyabinsk has a population of 1 million people. It's a big industrial town. And an asteroid, which we think now was about 17 meters, maybe 55 feet wide, entered the atmosphere going about 40,000 miles an hour. First seen, ever seen by humans, when it was that pinpoint of light entering the atmosphere, when it was about 100 kilometers, maybe 60 miles up. We've got, at some point, we've got some videos of this.
We can pull that up now.
And its path took it lower into the thicker parts of the atmosphere, burning up, breaking up as it went. And it mostly broke apart into tiny fragments. And the largest piece that remained was about 3 feet across. And that fell into Lake Chebarkul, so a frozen lake. Made a crater, not a crater, but a hole in the ice about 30 feet across. And the other fragments just kind of peppered the ground.
Can we see that clip of that little one? My favorite YouTube video on that was a truck driver who was just driving during the morning. It just gets really bright, and all he does is puts down his visor. That's all he does. I don't think this is the asteroid over Russia.
This was to illustrate.
I may be wrong.
Star Wars.
A popular misconception about asteroids is inspired in part by The Empire Strikes Back, is how many of them there are and how close they are together.
Mm. If you'd like to see a real asteroid, check out your local planetarium.
Absolutely. Come and touch some.
Yeah. There's a big one there that's just sitting on the table. If you can pick it up and take it, they'll let you.
Well, I can make a quick comment about this. So this is a plot of all known asteroids as of September 24th, a couple days ago when I sent the image over. The green objects are main belt asteroids. We know of about 800,000 of them now. They've been cataloged by surveys for a long, long time. First one found in 1801. The red ones are the near-Earth asteroids. Those are ones whose orbits take them within roughly about 30 million miles of the Earth. And that's just an arbitrary technical term when it's called near-Earth. 30 million is near in astronomy. And then some of the bluer ones, those are Trojan asteroids and more distant asteroids who share Jupiter's orbit. Now, there are about 18,000, almost 19,000 known near-Earth asteroids. And when you look at a plot like this, holy cow, it looks really, really, really scary. Like, Dave Barry once wrote a column about an asteroid, possible asteroid impacts, and he called the Earth looking like an upthrust target in a cosmic game of whack-a-mole, and that's always stuck with me. But the plot is misleading because space is huge, 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 huge. And it's almost impossible to conceive of how big it is. And maybe if we go to the next slide, we can have an illustration of that. The image of Wrigley Field, perhaps. Imagine...
There's lag time. Don't worry about it.
Imagine the asteroid belt as being as big as Wrigley Field.
I can imagine it.
Okay. So imagine the asteroid belt as big as Wrigley Field. Now, on top of Wrigley Field, the asteroids occupy a region that kind of looks like a donut. So imagine a huge donut the size of Wrigley Field. It's not only extending across, 600 plus feet of the field from side to side, the entire stadium, right? But also up about 60, 80 feet. Yeah, there we go. So a donut-shaped region. So we have a donut. They're the size of Wrigley Field.
It was worth waiting for.
Now, we want to add asteroids into that volume. This is a volume of space, okay? All right, take a pinch of powdered sugar, all right? And now take your fingers with that pinch of powdered sugar and rub that stuff off. Rub it off really well. Rub it on your pants. Make sure your hands are really clean. The particles that are still clinging to your fingertips, about 6 micrograms worth. If this was LSD, you wouldn't even notice that amount. Okay, so little. Now take what's left there and spread it out through the entire volume of that donut. Not just on the surface, through the whole volume of that donut. And that represents the amount and the density of asteroids in the asteroid belt. Very, very, very few and far between. If you were standing on a random one, looking around in the sky with your eyes dark adapted out there in space, most places you would not see any other asteroids out there. Now, why is it that asteroids are a threat, given how few and far between? That's because time is also astronomical. 66 million years is a really, really, really long time. And over timescales of those, we do get hit by asteroids.
Thank you. All right, Mark, you want to come? Bob, you want to come back up here? One last question for you, Bob, before we move to Q&A. Sure. So, despite the inaccuracies and the 2.6 million Google search results, at no fault of your own, is there anything about Armageddon that you're actually very happy about?
Yes. Right off the top of my head, I would say the thing that makes me happiest about Armageddon and the companion movie, Deep Impact, is that they did alert the policymakers in Washington to the fact that there was a threat out there. And it became much easier in the years right after that to get money for the asteroid search. And that was something that really needed to be done. And from what Mark tells me, it has been done. Now, did you actually play a role in searching for all those near-Earth asteroids?
Yeah, thanks for that kind of intro. So I have not been involved in surveys for hazardous asteroids, but we had a program running at the Adler, through the Adler, just ended back in 2017. It was running for 2.5 years, funded by NASA. I got a grant from them to study near-Earth asteroids, to follow up on newly discovered asteroids. Then by following up, I mean somebody else discovers them, one of these surveys, and then we take a much bigger telescope, which can see much farther, much fainter objects, and we follow up on those known asteroids for as long as we can, so we can really nail down their orbits. It was a shameful situation in 2013 when I wrote this grant proposal that all of these surveys for hazardous asteroids, they were saying, hey, we discovered this many, this many, this many, and they would never do any follow-up. And for the vast majority of newly discovered near-Earth asteroids were completely lost within 2 weeks' time. That means that we would have no way of knowing if these things were on an impact course or not. 20, 30 years in the future, anything like that. So we had to do this follow-up. So they gave us money to do that. And over that 2.5-year period, my team and I, mostly my team, observing at night, using a whole sixth of the time on the Apache Point Observatory in New Mexico, the full amount that the University of Chicago had used on that observatory with mostly my 2 observers. They followed up on more than 3,000 near-Earth asteroids out of a population then of about 15,000. And not a single one of them is on an impact course. So that's a full 20% of the population that we eliminated the risk from, which I thought was really good, but NASA didn't renew our funding.
What about the other 80%? The other 80% of the asteroids?
Yeah, so the idea, the strategy now is that impacts are so infrequent that future surveys are just going to run randomly across these things, and we'll find them again 20 years, 30 years from now, and that'll be good enough. But that won't protect us from impacts that might be coming before then.
We still have videos.
We still have some videos, yeah. So why don't we show some videos, please? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I mistook your note earlier that we needed to go. Okay, that was miscommunication on my part. Sorry, guys, I lied. Let's see those videos.
Okay, so I believe the first one is going to be the appearance of the fireball over Chelyabinsk. This is Chelyabinsk, Russia. You're seeing it right now. It's about 50 miles up, descending, breaking up into millions of fragments. Impact energy of about 0.5 megaton of TNT. The largest piece, about 3 feet across, hit a lake. Most of those fragments just fell into the countryside. People collected them as meteorites and have been selling them for good money. But
what can they do with those fragments?
Well, scientists study them. Asteroids in general are pieces, remnants of the formation of the solar system. Very scientifically interesting. We can't find that information anywhere else. Now, this is a smoke trail left behind. This is vaporized rock. Now, very importantly, no damage was done by the meteorites hitting the ground, but the sonic boom from that huge object, 55 feet wide, 40,000 miles an hour, the sonic boom reached the ground about 2 minutes later. So think about that. The fireball came down in complete silence. And then the sonic boom from that meteor entering the atmosphere broke more than 6,000 windows. Broke windows in more than 6,000 buildings throughout that whole region. And more than 1,600 people were sent to the hospital with injuries, mostly from broken glass. It's the most damaging asteroid impact for over 100 years since the Tunguska impact in 1908.
And we didn't know anything about that.
We never saw it coming for a couple of reasons.
It's only a
55
matter of
feet wide
time.
sounds big, but it's actually quite small. Even the survey telescopes, if they'd been pointing at exactly the right place, we'd have had maybe a 3-day warning. But we couldn't look at it. Ground-based observatories couldn't because it came from the direction of the sun, which for us here on the Earth defines daytime.
So will anything like a light sail help with that?
Space observatories that can look closer to the sun could help with that. Sorry, we're just
being
having a
recorded.
great conversation with ourselves up here.
Sorry about that. A little less scientific. What sort of sci-fi movies would you like to see in theaters? Do you want to see more fantasy in your sci-fi or more science in your sci-fi?
Well, I think both of us can answer that, yeah. What do I look for in a movie? Entertainment, right? You know, I look for the story. A lot of people expect scientists to be really totally focused on the science value, and we get that a lot when a movie like The Martian comes out, which is billed as being incredibly scientifically accurate, and it's also this idea that scientists are only interested in the details is exacerbated by people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has to nitpick everything that's wrong with a movie. Oh, no.
The stars were wrong in Titanic, guys.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't care about that kind of stuff generally. But if your movie bills itself as being accurate, like The Martian, and I watch it and I see scenes like, oh gosh, the winds on Mars toppling over that spacecraft. Well, man, that's way wrong. The author, of course, admits it. That's one of these gimmicks necessary to set up the drama. But when you set yourself up as being very accurate, that's when I get annoyed at the details that are wrong.
So you're saying that little detail in Martian was more upsetting to you than all the gross inaccuracies in Armageddon?
Yeah, because so many things were wrong with the science in Armageddon
Yeah.
And they didn't bill it as, they didn't have NASA folks going on and saying, this is, we consulted with this, it's so accurate, all of this stuff. So yeah, I treated Armageddon as a popcorn movie. I'd kind of wish that he got the asteroid science better. I was just finishing up graduate school. I was heading out into my career. Let's get it right so I can, help me get a job.
One thing that, because I read your synopsis of your movie, and one thing that really got to me was how you had a male and female heroine.
Yes.
And
in all of my best scripts, I've always got a male and female protagonist. And in fact, we have that in the movie I'm working on with Sandy, which is called Rigged. We have a male-female protagonist pair.
My thing was, in Armageddon, there are 14 astronauts that go up to save the world, all male. How are your feelings on your single female heroine being completely taken out and just being Liv Tyler?
I like Liv Tyler, but you're right.
She's a beautiful elf.
She was just an object over which the men were fighting, really. In the first act, Bruce Willis chases Ben Affleck around the oil rig with a shotgun, which is one of the stupidest, crazy scenes I've ever seen.
Why would you do that?
It's so dangerous to run around an oil rig with a shotgun. I mean, it was beyond imagination. I tried to persuade them that this was just too dumb and offensive, and every roughneck in the world would be horrified at this, but they didn't care. They thought it was fun.
Even Ben Affleck tried, poor guy.
They thought it was fun. And, is it fun? I'll let you be the judge of that.
Fun, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun.
But when you knew that a woman was involved in possibly saving the world as well, then and then you go to Armageddon, it's just kind of like, oh.
She's the one who actually does save the world in the very, very end of my scenario. Because in my story, it came down to a coin flip. At the very last moment, they discover that it's not one asteroid, but it's two. And they've been trying to slow it down with the gravity beam. But as they've done that, the two asteroids have moved apart. So now they're farther apart, and the gravity beam can only slow down one or the other. And they have to choose which one they're going to let hit the Earth and which one they're going to deflect. And so one of them is going to hit the Kaibab Plateau in northern Arizona, and the other one is going to hit the Sangre de Cristo Mountains in New Mexico. And I'll just pose this idea to Mark. Okay, so which one do you deflect? Which one do you let hit?
Personally, I would deflect the one that is headed towards a more populous region.
Neither of the regions is terribly populated, so they're about equal in that regard. But however, Los Alamos National Lab is in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So if you let that one hit, you're going to take out Los Alamos and all the smart people. And it happens that our protagonists are both at Los Alamos, okay? So if they let that one hit, they're basically killing themselves. But they got to do the right thing for the whole Earth, okay? They got to decide, and they got to literally decide in 20 seconds. So they flip a coin. They flip a coin, and at the last second, while the coin's in the air, it's the female protagonist who says, wait a minute, there is a way to decide. She catches the coin in the air, and she won't let him look at it. And she says, we're going to let it hit here. We're going to deflect the one that's headed for the Kaibab Plateau. And the reason for that was because the Kaibab Plateau is very soft terrain. And so when that asteroid hits, it's going to spew more total material into the air than the one that hits the Granite Mountains in New Mexico. And it'll be a lot more, but I don't know how much more.
Yeah, I'd have to do the calculations on the impact energy to
Come on,
to work
you're a
that
scientist.
out.
It's off the top of your head.
Which I would do as a consultant, That's the kind of thing I would look at.
Yeah, and then you would be able to let them decide. But the worst case scenario, which they also had to face as a possibility in my story, was that the thing would hit the Pacific Ocean, which is absolutely the worst case scenario because it would generate tsunamis that would be, who knows, a mile high, that would penetrate as far as, I don't know, it would wipe out Tokyo, it would wipe out Hong Kong, it would wipe out Los Angeles and San Francisco.
Yeah, that's a part of the movie Deep Impact that they got really well, I think. They had a comet fragment impact in the Atlantic Ocean off the eastern seaboard. And if such a thing were to happen, if it were big enough, say about a kilometer-wide chunk, you would literally get a tsunami sweeping inland all the way to the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. It's absolutely, absolutely crazy. Because not only would the deep water wave be huge, we're talking hundreds of meters, 1,000 feet or more, but you get this thing called run-up when you run onto the continental shelf and up on the beach, and it amplifies the altitude of the wave. And yeah, you would get flooding like has never been seen in any of human history.
Yeah, so that would be a scenario in which you would lose 1 billion or 2 billion human beings in a matter of minutes or hours after the impact.